The town of Willowbrook had never known a sadness like the one that fell over it the day Lily Morgan died. The 7-year-old had been the kind of child who made the world brighter. Her laughter was contagious, her kindness endless, and her presence alone could lift the heaviest hearts. So when she fell ill, no one expected it to be serious. At first, it seemed like a simple fever, the kind kids bounce back from in a day or two. But then she didn't get better. Doctors ran tests, whispered in hushed tones, and finally delivered the unthinkable news. Lily was gone. Just like that. The illness had taken her too quickly, leaving no time for goodbyes. Her parents, Claire and Daniel, were shattered. The entire town mourned. And then there was Max. Max, Lily's German shepherd, had been her shadow since the day she learned to walk. Wherever Lily went, Max followed through sunlit fields, into muddy puddles, even under blanket forts where they'd hide together for hours. He wasn't just a pet. He was her protector, her best friend. So when Lily's small, still body was laid in the open casket for the funeral, Max did something no one expected. He jumped right in beside her. At first, people assumed it was grief. The poor dog didn't understand. He thought she was sleeping. But when the service ended and the mourners began to leave, Max refused to move. Blair called him softly. Her voice breaking, Daniel tried to gently pull him away. Even the funeral director attempted to coax him out with treats. But Max wouldn't budge. He lay beside Lily, his head resting on her chest, his eyes unblinking. The family exhausted by sorrow decided to let him stay a little longer. Maybe he needed to say goodbye in his own way. But as the last car pulled away, and the evening shadows stretched across the cemetery, Max's whimpers cut through the silence. Not the usual sounds of a grieving animal, these were urgent, almost desperate. He nudged Lily's hand with his nose, over and over, as if trying to wake her. Then the impossible happened. Lily's fingers twitched. The funeral director, Mr. Harris, had just returned to close the casket when he saw the slight, almost imperceptible movement of Lily's fingers. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, a cruel trick of the dim light or his own exhaustion. But then Max let out a sharp, urgent bark, and the girl's chest rose just once, barely there, but unmistakable. Mr. Harris staggered back, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had been preparing bodies for burial for 30 years, and in all that time, he had never seen anything like this. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, fumbling to call 911. His voice barely above a whisper as he told the operator, "You need to send someone now. The little girl, she's breathing." Paramedics arrived in minutes, their disbelief turning to frantic action as they confirmed what seemed impossible. Lily was alive. Her pulse was faint, her breaths shallow. But she was here. The hospital, the same one that had declared her dead just days before, scrambled to explain. Tests were run, specialists consulted, and finally, the truth came out. Lee had suffered from an extraordinarily rare neurological condition. One that mimicked death so perfectly even seasoned doctors had missed it. Her body had shut down into a coma-like state so deep that no stethoscope, no machine, could detect the faint flicker of life still inside her. No one would have ever known except for Max. The news spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. Miracle, people whispered. A second chance. Reporters crowded the hospital, desperate for answers, but Lily's parents refused to speak to them. They sat by her bedside, holding her small hands, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, too afraid to believe she might really come back to them. And Max? He never left the hospital doors. He sat in the waiting room, head on his paws, ears twitching at every sound, as if standing guard. Nurses brought him water, sneaked him scraps of food, but he wouldn't eat much. He was waiting, just like everyone else. Then, 3 days later, Lily opened her eyes. The moment Lily's eyes fluttered open, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her parents, the doctors, even the beeping monitors seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was waiting to hear her first words. Her gaze was unfocused at first, drifting across the ceiling before settling on her mother's tear-streaked face. Claire gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, afraid to move, afraid to blink, as if the slightest disturbance might shatter this fragile miracle. Then, in a voice so soft it was barely more than a whisper, Lily said, "Mommy, why is it so dark here?" The question sent a ripple of confusion through the room. The hospital lights were bright, almost harsh. How could she think it was dark? But before anyone could respond, Lily's small fingers curled into the sheets, her brow furrowing as she turned her head toward the window, where sunlight streamed in. "No, not here," she murmured, her voice distant, as if she were speaking from somewhere far away. There, it was so dark there. The doctors exchanged glances. Hallucinations weren't uncommon after such a traumatic event, they assured. Her parents, her brain was still adjusting, still healing. But then Lily began to describe things she shouldn't have known. She talked about the funeral, about the flowers on her casket, about the way her father had collapsed when they lowered her into the ground. Claire's blood ran cold. "Lily, you weren't awake then," she said carefully, gripping Daniel's hand for support. But Lily only shook her head, her eyes wide and eerily knowing. "I was," she insisted. "I was there, but I couldn't move. I couldn't talk. I tried and tried, but no one heard me." Then, her voice dropping to a whisper, she added, "Except Max. He heard me." That night, as her parents sat by her bedside, too afraid to sleep, Lily began to speak again, this time about a place she called the Bright Forest. Wasn't like any forest they knew. The trees shimmered, she said, like they were made of light, and the air hummed with a sound like faraway singing. She had walked there, she told them, and there were other children, some she recognized from pictures in the town's missing persons bulletins, others whose faces she didn't know. One of them, a girl with curly brown hair and a torn yellow dress, had taken her hand and whispered a name, Sarah. Lily's voice trembled as she repeated it. She said, "We had to tell someone. She said she's under the old tree." Claire and Daniel stared at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. There was an old tree, the massive oak, at the edge of Blackwood Park, where kids used to dare each other to go at night. And Sarah. That name hadn't been spoken in Willowbrook for years. Sarah Milligan had disappeared a decade ago when she was just 8 years old. The case had gone cold, the searches had ended, and eventually the town had tried to move on. But now here was Lily, who had never even heard the story, talking about her as if she'd just seen her yesterday. Daniel's hands shook as he pulled out his phone. He didn't know who to call the police. A psychiatrist? But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a miracle anymore. Something far stranger was happening. The police were skeptical at first, understandably so, when a 7-year-old girl who had just returned from the dead started giving them clues about a decade-old missing persons case. But there was something in Lily's voice, a quiet certainty, that sent an uneasy prickle down Chief Reynolds' spine, making him hesitate before dismissing her words as the ramblings of a traumatized child. He had been on the force when Sarah Milligan vanished, had seen the way it tore the town apart, the way her parents' faces never quite lost that hollow, broken look even years later. So when Lily, without prompting, described the exact pattern of daisies on Sarah's yellow dress, a detail never released to the public, he felt the first real flicker of doubt. What if this wasn't just a coincidence? What if there was something otherworldly at play here? The quiet order to his Team Chief Reynolds organized a discreet search of Blackwood Park, focusing on the gnarled old oak that stood sentinel at the edge of the woods. The officers moved carefully, their flashlights cutting through the early morning mist, the air thick with the damp scent of earth and decaying leaves. No one spoke much. The whole thing felt surreal, like they were stepping into a ghost story. Then, just as the sun began to rise, casting long, skeletal shadows across the ground, Officer Garza's shovel struck something solid, not a root. It's not a rock, but the unmistakable curve of a small, weathered bone. The dig turned frantic then, methodical, till the full horror was uncovered. The skeletal remains of a child, still clad in the tattered remnants of a yellow dress, curled beneath the twisted roots of the tree as if the earth itself had cradled her. Back at the hospital, Lily didn't react when her parents told her the news. She simply nodded, as if she'd known all along, her fingers absently stroking Max's fur where he lay pressed against her side. "Sarah's glad," she murmured. She didn't like being alone in the dark. The words sent a chill through the room. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup, the steam long gone cold. How could her daughter know these things? How could she see what no one else could? The doctors had no answers, only more questions, their theories ranging from latent psychic abilities to the effects of her near-death experience on her developing brain. But none of it explained the way Lily would sometimes tilt her head, as if listening to someone none of them could hear, or the way Max's ears would perk up at the same moment, his dark eyes fixed on empty corners of the room. Then came the final twist, the one that would unravel everything. As investigators combed through the evidence from Sarah's burial site, they found something that shouldn't have been there: a rusted locket. Its hinges broken, containing a tiny faded photograph of another child, a boy named Jacob, who had disappeared 5 years before Sarah. Lily recognized him instantly. "He's in the bright forest too," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "He says the bad man put him under the water." Chief Reynolds felt the ground tilt beneath him. Jacob Riley's case had been ruled an accidental drowning, his body pulled from the river on the outskirts of town. But if Lily was right, if there was a bad man, then none of these deaths were accidents. And worse, if Lily's connection to this bright forest was real, then she might be the only one who could lead them to the truth. The town of Willowbrook, once cloaked in grief, now thrummed with an eerie tension, a mix of hope, fear, and something darker lurking beneath the surface. Parents held their children tighter, glancing over their shoulders at every unfamiliar face, while the police station overflowed with files of cold cases pulled from dusty storage boxes, each one a potential piece of the horrifying puzzle Lily had unknowingly unearthed. Chief Reynolds, a man who had always prided himself on logic and evidence, found himself staring at a corkboard strung with photos of missing children, their smiling faces frozen in time, connected by a single, unthinkable thread. They had all been taken within a 20-mile radius over the past 15 years. Their cases long gone cold, their families left with nothing but unanswered questions. And now here was Lily, a little girl who had cheated death itself, pointing them toward truths no living person should have known. The bad man Lily spoke of became the focus of every investigation. Though she could offer little more than fleeting impressions, smell like gasoline and mint, a voice that crackled like fire, a silver ring with a black stone that caught the light when he moved his hands. But it was enough to send a jolt through Detective Maria Vasquez, a recent transfer to Willowbrook, who had spent years working a similar string of disappearances to counties over. The details lined up too perfectly. The locket found with Sarah's remains matched the description of one reported missing from another victim, and Jacob's supposed drowning had occurred near an old abandoned boathouse that locals avoided. Whispering about strange lights and sounds coming from it at night, Vasquez's hands shook as she placed the files side by side, the pieces clicking together with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just one killer. It was a pattern, a hunting ground. Willowbrook had been at the center of it for years, without ever realizing. Meanwhile, Lily's visions grew more frequent, more vivid. She woke screaming some nights, clawing at her blankets, sobbing about the door she wasn't supposed to see, a rusted metal door in the ground, hidden beneath leaves, with voices calling from the other side. Max would whine and pace during these episodes, his fur bristling, as if he too sensed the danger lurking just beyond sight. One evening, as Claire tried to calm her daughter, Lily suddenly went still, her eyes widening with a terrible realization. "He knows," she whispered. "The bad man knows. I can see him." The words sent a paralyzing fear through Claire. Was it possible? Could this monster somehow sense that Lily was unraveling his secrets? The next morning, when a patrol car drove past the Morgan house and found tire tracks in the mud near their backyard, tracks that hadn't been there the night before, the unthinkable became undeniable. Someone was watching. And Lily was no longer just a witness. She was a target. Chief Reynolds made the call to put the Morgan family under protection. But even as officers took up posts around their home, the dread in the air was palpable. Because if this killer had stayed hidden for so long, if he'd outsmarted them for decades, What would stop him now? What if Lily's connection to the bright forest wasn't just showing them the past? What if it was a warning about what was still to come? The atmosphere in the Morgan household had become suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind against the windows sent Claire's heart racing, her grip tightening around the steaming mug of tea she could never quite finish. Daniel had taken to sleeping with a baseball bat beside the bed, his restless movements betraying the exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. While Max, usually so calm now, paced the halls at night, his low growls rumbling like distant thunder. Whenever headlights flickered past the driveway, Lily, though, was eerily quiet, her once bright eyes now shadowed with something far heavier than any child should carry. She spent hours drawing in her notebook, pages filled with crooked trees and faceless figures, but one sketch kept reappearing: a door, just as she'd described, its hinges twisted, its surface scarred with deep, angry scratches, as if someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. When Detective Vasquez gently asked why she kept drawing it, Lily's answer was a whisper: because they're waiting for someone to open it. Then, on the third night of police surveillance, the unthinkable happened. The officer stationed outside the Morgan home, a rookie named Bennett, was found slumped in his car just before dawn. Not dead, but unconscious, his forehead bleeding from a sharp blow. His dashcam had been disabled, his radio smashed, and the only clue left behind was a single item placed deliberately on the passenger seat, a silver ring with a black stone. The message was clear: he'd been here. The killer had walked right past them, bold as daylight, and taken something to Lily's favorite hair ribbon, the one with tiny strawberries on it, which she'd left on the porch railing the evening before. When Chief Reynolds held it up, his face ashen, Lily didn't cry. She just stared at it, her small hands curling into fists, and said, "He wants me to follow him. He thinks the door will open for me." Panic erupted. The FBI was called, the town placed on high alert, and yet, even with the flood of reinforcements, an awful truth settled over them. All this man wasn't just a killer. He was a hunter, patient and precise, and he'd marked Lily as his next prey. But what no one could reconcile was why. Why her? Why now? The answer came in the dead of night, when Lily bolted upright in bed, gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat. Max was at her side instantly, his body rigid, a snarl building in his throat as she clutched at him, her words tumbling out in a terrified rush. "He doesn't want to hurt me. He wants to keep me, because I can hear them, the others. And he's scared they'll tell me his name." The revelation sent a shockwave through the task force. This wasn't just about covering his tracks anymore. The killer believed Lily could somehow expose him through the voices of his victims, and that made her more dangerous to him than any detective, any evidence. As Vasquez pored over the files, a single, chilling realization struck her. Every child taken had vanished near a body of water at the river where Jacob was found, the lake by Blackwood Park, the creek behind the old elementary school. Water hid. Things water erased. Things. But it also preserved things. And if they could follow Lily's visions to the right place, they might find not just answers, but the key to stopping him for good. The problem was time was running out, because the killer wasn't waiting anymore. The rain came down in sheets. The night everything came to a head, not the gentle, whispering kind, but a torrential downpour that turned the streets of Willowbrook into rivers. The wind howling through the trees like the voices Lily claimed to hear. The police scanner crackled with frantic updates, a sighting near the old boathouse. A figure in a dark coat spotted lurking by the elementary school. A child's scream reported near the riverbank, though no child had been out in the storm. The town was a maze of false leads and mounting terror, and through it all, Lily sat in the back of Detective Vasquez's car, her small face pressed against the window, Max tense and quivering at her feet. She hadn't spoken in hours, but her hands kept tracing the same shape over and over in the fogged glass. The door. Then, without warning, she went rigid, her breath fogging the glass in short, panicked bursts. "He's at the creek," she whispered. "Where the rocks make a circle, he's digging." Vasquez didn't hesitate. She radioed the location to Reynolds, then hit the gas, the car tearing through the storm, headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. The creek was swollen from the rain, the water churning violently where it curled around a half-ring of jagged stones, a spot locals called the Devil's Cup, where the current ran deceptively still beneath the surface. And there, just beyond the tree line, a shadow moved. A man, his back to them, shovel in hand, hunched over something in the mud. Vasquez drew her gun, shouting for him to freeze. But the moment the words left her mouth, Lily let out a cry and wrenched open the car door, Max exploding out after her. "No, Lily, stop!" Vasquez screamed, but the girl was already running. Her bare feet slipping in the mud, her nightgown plastered to her skin by the rain. The man turned, his face obscured by the hood of his coat, but Lily didn't falter. She skidded to a stop a few feet from him, her small chest heaving, and pointed to the ground at his feet. "You can't hide them anymore," she said, her voice carrying a weight beyond her years. They're asterisk loud now. Asterisk for a heartbeat. Nothing moved. Then, with a snarl, the man lunged not for Lily, but for the shovel, swinging it wildly toward her head. Max was faster. The dog hit him mid-motion, a snarling, snapping blur of teeth and fur, his weight sending them both crashing into the mud. The struggle was vicious, but brief. By the time Vasquez reached them, her gun trained on the man's chest, Max had him. Pinned, his jaws locked around the man's wrist, the taste of blood and rainwater in his mouth. The hood fell back, revealing a face half the town recognized. Mr. Harlow? The quiet groundskeeper from the cemetery? The man who'd dug graves for Willowbrook's dead for 20 years? The man who'd stood silently by as Lily's casket was lowered into the earth. His lips peeled back in a grimace as Vasquez cuffed him, his voice a broken rasp. "She wasn't supposed to wake up," he hissed. None of them were. Behind them, Lily had dropped to her knees in the mud, her small hands brushing at the disturbed earth. And there, just beneath the surface, glinted something metal, the edge of a rusted door, exactly like the one in her drawings. It took hours for the forensic team to pry it open, longer still to process what lay beneath. A chamber, lined with tiny shoes, toys, and lockets, and at the center, a row of small, carefully arranged bones. The missing, the ones who hadn't been found. The ones who'd been waiting in the weeks that followed. The town reeled. Mr. Harlow's trial was swift, his confession chilling in its clinical detachment. He'd chosen children who wouldn't be missed, he said. Orphans, runaways, the ones whose disappearances could be blamed on the woods, the water, the whims of fate. He'd buried them near the places they'd last been seen, hiding them in plain sight, their graves marked only by the roots of trees or the currents of the creek. But he hadn't counted on Lily. He hadn't counted on Max. On the day of the memorial service, the real one. This time, for all the lost children, Lily stood at the edge of the crowd, Max pressed against her side. The sun was out, the air crisped with the promise of autumn. And as the names of the missing were read aloud, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of wildflower seeds. She scattered them over the fresh-turned earth, her voice soft, but steady. "You can go now," she whispered. "Now you're not alone anymore." And somewhere in the rustle of the leaves and the sigh of the wind, it almost sounded like they were thanking her. Max nuzzled her hand, his tail wagging gently. And for the first time since she'd woken up in that hospital bed, Lily smiled.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.